bandwidth limited pulse. And this also spreads across all the spectrum, but in regular intervals where the signal strength goes up and then down again. So you get all those lobes depending on your position and depending on the specific conditions. So that's what I wanted to see. I was starting with the stuff I received at the radio scanner, and the new toy we have these days we didn't have back then is of course the USRP from the GNU Radio project, which is a high bandwidth receiver. And so I started to look for those patterns together with a couple of friends supporting me for the trip, and try to find signals. So these are the measurements we did with the German NEDAP. So the first thing we did was look at the baseband signal, so the frequency from 0 to 8 megahertz in this case, based on the assumption that maybe if you've seen the graph on that this one, you see that in theory, in most cases, on the lowest frequency, you have the highest energy. That's not always correct, though. If you look at the one at the bottom, there are conditions where the main lobe shifts further towards higher frequencies, which has to do with resonance frequencies of the wires, etc., etc. So we were first looking at the baseband signal. This is the background signal with the machine turned off. This is the same signal. Can we maybe turn off the lights here in the front that you see more on the projector? No? Where? Okay. We can't. So if you look really careful, you see that between the base signal, the background noise, and the baseband with NEDAP turned on, there are some differences. You see frequencies coming into it, like those lines here, this line there. The antenna I was using for that was a magnetic loop antenna, and unfortunately the two thick lines you see there. Oh, by the way, who's never seen such a diagram, this is the frequency spectrum. Time runs from down to up, and the frequency runs here into the positive direction and here into negative direction. So if I give you a frequency later, that will be the center frequency. We are at the moment in the baseband where the center frequency is 0, so essentially the left is a mirror of the right. And the magnetic loop antenna is useful for low frequencies, but it generates this noise. So that's antenna noise. Okay, so there were a couple of lines that were coming into the spectrum, and I was zooming in a bit closer and didn't really see much. So these are the lines that appeared, but they're not very modulated. I didn't see a lot of information in that. So we played around a bit, and finally decided to actually try the frequencies we used in 2006 with the radio scanner. And yeah, that was a little bit more successful. If you look really closely, you can see here a band forming. This is the spectrum, and as you can see here, this is the noise level, and this is the signal, so it's almost there. So if you look really closely and maybe take a bit of mushrooms, you see the signal in there. And yeah, that was no good. So we played around with different antennas, and this is using actually this very antenna I'm using here that you're seeing there on the device at the moment, and that's better already. So we see this and that line over there is generated by the device, and that in the middle as well. Yeah, and again, distance now is a bit bigger, and the signal is still there. You see it on the left a bit. You see the spike, and you see maybe 5 decibels or so of signal strength. So again, close to the device, and now we are starting to press buttons on the device. It's again very hard to see on the projector, but here in the upper region, this is where the display is empty. You see those lines there? And here, in that area, the display is displaying content. And the noise you've heard, that's a refresh of the display. It refreshes itself every 13 milliseconds, 70 times per second. And in this area, you see maybe here and here and here and here a repetitive pattern. So, well, we see something. We see, if we press a button, the display is blanked. We see that there are repeats in there. We tried a couple of other frequencies to confirm that the theory that we see the signal in regular intervals according to the theory. And actually we do. We see the signal in varying strength at multiples of 4 megahertz. So that's a measurement at 120 megahertz. You see again part of the signal here, see part of it here, and on the left side. Okay, and then we came home, and we're very proud to have those recordings and everything, and I was looking at the signal, and then found out that I had messed up, and we had sample drops in our recordings. So what we could do was give a quantitative analysis of the signal strength, which is pretty much the same as for the NEDAP we tested in 2006. So if you walked away with the scanner, the distances were the same. But as you've seen, the pictures were a bit unclear because samples have been dropped, and I've also been unable to extract any meaningful differences between different LCD pictures in there. So we decided to call our Dutch friends again and ask them to get the NEDAPs out of the closet and bring them here. And so I spent the day yesterday to recreate measurements and to see whether I can, whether actually there's a difference between the Dutch and the German, or whether it's the same, etc., etc. And that's what we see here. Now, the thing is, they brought 2 NEDAPs. And also in Germany, there are 2 different models. It's the ESD1 and ESD2 that's allowed to be used. And we have here in refurbished, I think it says, where's the type sign? ES3B, and the B is written by hand. So it used to be an ES3A and has been refurbished. And there's another one which says ES3B, and the B is actually printed, so it's actually a new one. And I started doing measurements with the new one and noticed that the signal was a lot weaker than with the machine we have measured in Germany, and also a lot weaker than I remembered from the experiments in 2006. So this is the best result I could get from the new NEDAP. And I think in this picture now, without the sample loss, you pretty much see the display refresh structure. You see it's a periodic signal, and this is where it does the refresh, and this is where it, the retrace, except that it doesn't retrace. And this is where the content is, and then the signal repeats. Introduction, signal, etc., etc., etc. And if you look at that, you see that you have maybe, so those lines are 20 dB. So your signal-to-noise ratio is, if you look at that here, maybe 20, maybe only 10 dB for really interesting stuff, so not very good. So we tried it again with the old NEDAP, and that's a much better picture. You can actually see something in there, you see structure. And yeah, this was 256 kilohertz bandwidth. This was shot with 8 megahertz bandwidth. So what we saw in the last picture is only this very rich in energy stripe in the middle. And with the old machine, I didn't see anything in the side lobes here. With the new machine. And with the old machine, I really saw a lot. So that's 8 megahertz of bandwidth. That means we get 120,000 complex samples per refresh. And yeah, a lot better. And you can actually see it change